primary subjects, and I wanted to know how can you edit dialogue, or do you have any tips for it? So again, this is not going to be an entire full audio course, but I did want to show some tips on it. So I'm going to switch over to this second project. I'm going to hit the Z key. I'm actually holding the letter Z down to activate temporarily the zoom tool, and then I'm going to click and drag around these two clips here to zoom the timeline into that spot. And then when I let go of the Z key, notice it switched back to the arrow tool or the select tool. So here I have two clips. They're very blurred out clips, and that's okay. The point is not to see the video, it's to look at the audio here. And this first clip we're going to say is the host talking, and then there's a second clip here with the guest talking. So this, we have two pieces of dialogue. That's actually two separate cameras that we're recording an interview. And so we have the host on one side and the subject or the guest on the other side. So the first thing with the audio is I'm actually going to drag this up and sync it up with the first clip. And there's plenty of videos out there that you can look at how to sync audio together. But let's say that these two audio clips are synced together. The first tip I have for editing dialogue is to label these clips using audio roles. And you can do this by going into the timeline index on the left side here. You can also use the inspector, but I like to use the index here to see what we have set up for these first, and then you can actually go in and change it. So the index, you have clips, tags, and roles, and you actually want to go to the roles kind of tab here. And this shows all of the roles that we're using in this project. Now roles are kind of, I like to think of it like, what is your role in a production? Maybe you're an actor, or maybe you're the editor, like you're doing here. So actors would get one role, and editors would get another. And that's kind of what we have here. If you have video, it's going to be one role, or maybe you have titles, and it's another. And if you've been editing Final Cut, you know that when you put a title in, it comes up as purple, and that's because of these roles. And audio works the same way. We actually have dialogue right now, and that's why all of these clips are blue. We could select one of these clips, say the guest, and I'll go into the audio inspector, which is this little, looks like a little speaker icon. And at the bottom, we have our audio configuration, and there is a roles drop-down menu here to be able to see that. Now these clips here, I made little compound clips. So I have my dialogue at the bottom here, and I'll actually double click on this clip to go into it, select that, and then here's our configuration, our role. And it's dialogue right now, and these configurations can be a little confusing, but look for this little caret or little down arrow, and you can click on this, and this shows us all of the various roles that are available, and this is going to be specific to the library that you're in. So if I wanted to, I could say this is music, and if I click on music, notice the clip changes to green, because now it has a green role, which in this case is set to music. Or I could change this back to dialogue because I know it is some source of dialogue. Yeah, it switches back to blue there. Now, if you want, you'll see when you are looking at this menu on the right, there's an option at the bottom to edit roles. It's also over in the timeline index. There's an option there to edit roles. They both go to the same place. And this is where you can edit your roles. So if you know you want to set up dialogue a certain way, or the color coding for your project, you can do that. Now we're talking here about audio, but you could do this with video as well and set up all these various roles, which is pretty nice way to color code things. So for audio, I do have dialogue, which I know that's what both of these are, and that's why they're blue clips. So that's accurate, but we can organize a little bit further by adding a subrole. So I can click the plus there, and notice now I get a new subrole. So these subroles, you can also go and edit the names of the ones that already exists here. But these subroles are just for organization. So I'm going to call this one our host, and then we'll change this one's name to guest. And then on the left here, I can hit the minus to get rid of roles maybe I'm no longer using. Or like here, we have dialogue 1 and 2. I could go ahead and get rid of dialogue 1, and then just call this one dialogue. So in all of this, you can go through and rename and change these things in here, which is nice. And then lastly, I'll point this out while we're here. On the right side, there's a little color wheel here. If you click on that wheel, it lets you switch the actual color for this audio role. So again, the point of color coding things is to make it easier for you to see the audio you're working with. So select these colors based on what works for you. I'm completely fine with blue, so I'm going to keep it that way and hit apply. And then continue on there because we're deleting Subroles, which is okay for here. All right, so now that I've done that with this audio clip selected, I'm going to go back into my inspector, and instead of dialogue, I know this is the guest, so let's change this to guest. And then if I go back to my project, I can do the same thing on the host side and change that as well. So the guest gets labeled and the host will get labeled as well. And because I made these compound clips, I just have to double click on them, open them up, and mark this as the host. All right. So now I've labeled my audio there for the interview. And what that helps out with is now in the timeline index, you can actually expand the dialogue part out here to show you your various components. So this first thing here is to show or collapse the audio lanes, which notice here now, instead of having these two clips combined, let me go to before, which is here. When you show the audio lanes, it puts your audio tracks kind of side by side there, which is really nice. So it can make it really easy to see what's happening next to each other. And then the other part that's here is the option to go through and expand or collapse subroles of a clip. So with dialogue, I expand it out, and notice there's my host, and I think dialogue 1 there is the guest there. So I could actually uncheck or check these to enable or disable a specific role on the side here. So if you wanted to silence one of those, in this case, I've unchecked the guest, which is this one. And now the guest audio won't be coming through when I'm playing this back. So that's another way to edit audio together. And all of these organization components of Final Cut really make editing dialogue, especially with two people, really easy because you can combine and merge things that you normally wouldn't have seen before. And feel free to go through and experiment with these features because there's a lot of customization that you can do. In this case, I had an empty subrole here, so I can rearrange these and move them so the audio is right next to each other. And all of this is non-destructive. So we haven't actually lost anything by showing and expanding all of these components and the subroles. I can just undo all of this by hiding the index. And if you played this back, it would have sounded the same either way. Now, the other part of editing the audio here and the video is you may actually want to start cutting back and forth between these two videos. And that's where it can get a little tricky because if you cut out the video, you're going to lose the audio there. So it may be helpful to go through and detach the audio from the video so you can edit them separately. And you can do that a couple ways. You can select the clip, this is the way I recommend doing it, and use the shortcut Control-Shift-S. And that detaches the audio. So now notice the guest audio is down below. If I select the host and do the same thing, Control-Shift-S, it detaches the host as well. So now these audio clips are completely separate from the video clips, and you can go and edit them on their own. And then the final thing I wanted to point out while we're talking about audio here, I'm going to do Shift-Z to switch over here on the left. We have a multicam clip that I can use to explain this, is some audio clips and video clips have multiple channels. And what that means, some other apps call it multi-track audio, but you may have a clip where maybe you just had one camera and you were recording something, but you actually had two microphones connected to that camera. Well, most of the time, Final Cut is going to see that as one piece of audio. Notice this multicam clip. It only shows one waveform at the bottom. If I double click on it, it expands that component, but there's really only one audio clip here. So what you can do is actually select this clip, go into the audio inspector again, go down to audio configuration, and notice if I scroll through this, you can see all the various cameras that are included in this audio configuration. If I double click at the top here, where it says the name of the clip, actually I'll expand the inspector out so that we take up a little bit more room here, and you can see all of those listed. And on the left side, I can just check off the other audio sources from these various devices here. So maybe I want all of them to be active. I could do that just by checking them off. And you're seeing all of the different audio tracks that are included in this one clip. Now that's great. That enables all of them. So now it's trying to redraw the waveform so they're all going to play together. And if I double click to expand it though, it's still considered or viewed as one audio track. So how do you get all those separated on the timeline so you can edit them independently? Well, this is where we're just going to go through and expand the audio components. So you can either right click if you have that enabled or use control click. And there's an option here that says expand audio components. So if we hit that, notice now on the timeline here, I'm going to actually extend the size of my timeline here so we can see it. All of the different audio components for this clip are there, which are all of these different recordings. So the audio that I had from the Canon camera, the various iPhones and iPads are all there. Notice the waveforms are different for each of those channels. So these are all different audio components that we can go in and edit. If I hold down Option, I can click on the audio track here and add in keyframes and start editing the volume levels and changing that for all of these. So this is really where you can go through and start having more control with your audio, which is really nice because it can be tricky. I've seen people go through and add the same clip over and over and over again so that they can kind of get the results that they're looking for. But if you know about this audio configuration setting inside the inspector and get really familiar with it, it helps out in editing your audio, especially when you have multi-track audio. So to summarize, what are some tips for editing dialogue? The first tip, kind of out of two, the first tip I recommend is label your clips using roles and get familiar with the timeline index roles section here. And then the second part is learn to use the audio inspector, specifically the bottom section that says audio configuration. This allows you to change the configuration of any of your clips and how the audio is going to be presented and the ability to edit it. So that is the second question. And then the third question that I wanted to answer that someone reached out to me is they were editing their audio, or they were going to edit their audio in a different application from Final Cut. And they wanted to send over their